Hello, I am going to take some time today to show you some of the common pieces of equipment that we will use in the chemistry lab. Most of this stuff you're probably all familiar with or have at least seen. So we just want to make sure that we're using the correct names for items. And then I also want to take a moment to familiarize you with the general functions of each of the pieces of equipment. Okay. I would recommend that you get out some paper so that you can take some notes so that you have this to reference. You're going to need it for your assignment that goes along with this video. So I just have a plain piece of paper and I'm going to divide it into three parts because basically there are three general functions for all lab equipment. Okay, so I'm just going to divide this into those three parts that I mentioned. Now I'm going to actually physically show you the different pieces of equipment. If you are not familiar with something that I'm showing you, then maybe you would want to also jot down a picture when you copy down your notes. But if you, for example, know what a beaker is and are confident that you would always recognize a beaker, then you don't need to write anything else down. Okay, you don't have to draw a picture. You can just put the name down. Let's see here. I'm going to see if I can get this a little bit bigger. There we go. So as I mentioned, there's three basic functions for equipment. The first function is to measure. So in the lab, we have equipment that is especially designed for measuring. Okay, so to measure. So let's go over a couple of those pieces of equipment. The very first thing that you're going to use to measure with in this class commonly is something called a graduated cylinder. So have you guys seen these before? Here's a little bit of a smaller version. Okay. A graduated cylinder is used to measure volume. Okay, so volume is measured in milliliters. So that is an extremely important piece of equipment that we will use all the time. If I ask you to find 50 milliliters of something, you would need a graduated cylinder. So I'm going to write down graduated cylinder. And I'm also going to just include that it measures in volume, or it measures volume in milliliters. Okay. Another piece of equipment that we have that we use to measure with is a balance. And we are very lucky. We have saved our money here at Columbine and we have a balance for every lab station. Sorry. So here is one version. Okay. The balance, not like the graduated cylinder, is designed to measure mass. So this actually gives you a unit in grams. So just as a review, and we'll talk about this again later, remember that volume tells you how much space something occupies. And then mass is essentially a measurement of how much matter is there. Remember, in our second unit, we're going to talk about how many atoms are present in matter. And so mass allows us to calculate that. If we know the mass of something and we know what it's made of, we can calculate exactly how many atoms are present. So the next thing we're going to write down is a balance. Sometimes you might hear them called a scale. I'm not really picky about which version you use for the name, and they measure mass in grams. Okay. And then the last piece of equipment that we have for measuring is it's not a great measurer. This is a pipette. And it measures volume technically, but it measures in drops. So it's not terribly accurate. But we keep it there because we will oftentimes be asked to, for example, put like 5 drops of a solution into a reaction. So I'm going to put a dropper, or a pipette is the official term. And as the name suggests, it measures drops. Now, notice that I did not show you a beaker under measuring. Okay, so I'm going to show you a beaker right now. And I'm also going to show you a flask. So this is a beaker. And notice that it does have markings on it. And this is a flask. Sorry, notice that it has markings on it. But these are not for measuring, at least not accurately. So even though they have markings, you cannot use these to get a number that you can use for calculations. This just kind of gives us a rough estimate. Okay, so that brings us to our next category of items that we need to be familiar with in the lab, and that is items that we use to mix, hold things, and observe. And again, if you aren't familiar with any of these items that I show you, then when you write the name down in the category that they belong in, you should also put a little bit of a sketch. So here's a beaker. Beakers come in tons of sizes. This is a 150 milliliter beaker. I have them as small as, I think, 50 milliliters. So they're teeny tiny all the way up to 2 liters and huge, huge, almost like a bowl. Okay, so we have a beaker. Mix chemicals in there. We hold chemicals that we're going to pour into a solution. And then again, we have our flask. This is specifically called an Erlenmeyer flask. I just forgot how to spell. Shoot, sorry, hold on. Erlenmeyer flask. Okay. So you'll need to, I'll have to go back and double check my spelling on that. Sorry. I haven't used that word all summer. So that's an Erlenmeyer flask. And again, that's used to mix and hold. Okay. Another piece of glassware that kind of fits in that same category is a test tube. You guys have probably seen these before. So you have the test tube. Again, we don't measure with a test tube. We just put reactions in there and we observe. And when you are mixing and holding solutions, you may also want to use something called a stir rod. Okay, so you could take a beaker and put a stir rod in there and stir with that. So we have the stir rod. Okay. Along those lines, and actually this could probably be argued for measuring too. This can't accurately measure something. This is called a scoopula, but you might scoop chemicals out and put them on the balance. So, but you could also use it to mix. I'm going to put it in the mix, hold, and observe category. Scoopula. Okay. It's like a fancy spoon, basically. All right. Let's see here. We also have another piece of glassware. This is a watch glass. It's super dusty. I just pulled it out from back where they were doing all the construction back there. So this is a watch glass. So we would use a watch glass to maybe put a couple of drops of different solutions to observe a small reaction. You can also use a watch glass to cover a beaker if you need to kind of keep things from evaporating. So like that, you can cover a beaker. But mainly it's for watching little tiny reactions. Okay. Let's see here. I have a couple of items that don't actually fit onto our category. I'm going to show you those really quick. That first item would be a distilled water bottle. Okay, so this is a distilled water bottle. This is going to get refilled with special water. You never refill this from the sink. You are going to refill it from the distilled water container. We generate our own distilled water, and it's really important that you use distilled water in these because that means that it's just pure water. It's not going to add any additional ions that could possibly mess up a reaction. I guess this might be involved in mixing. So a lot of times, like if you've got two chemicals and you're pouring them together, you can use some distilled water, squirt it into your bottle or into your beaker and have the excess come out. So I'm going to put that underneath mixing. So we're going to put distilled water bottle. Okay, and then the other item that I was saying doesn't really fit into either of these categories, but it's important that we know what they are your goggles. And so you can see here I have 300 something pairs of these for all the students who are taking chemistry this year. They are bagged up, so you'll pull them out. They're all sanitized. On our first lab day, you'll pull them out of there. You'll put your name on them. I'll give you a different bag to store them in, okay? Here, I'm going to open this up so you can see what they look like. And they're pretty fancy, right? And they're kind of annoying, but you'll get used to them, okay? So those are your goggles. And again, these are for safety, right? We don't have that really as a category, but I just want to make sure that we all knew what goggles. See, they're nice because they fit right over your glasses. So see, I'm a glasses wearer and I can also wear my goggles. And then you tighten it so that they fit to your face. And then you get this really awesome mark across your forehead so everyone knows that you were in science class for the day. So there's goggles. Okay. Our final category of equipment that you need to be familiar with is used to heat things. So to heat and handle hot stuff. Obviously, you're not going to want to pick up a hot beaker, so we need to have something to do that with. Okay, so let's talk about the handling part first. So I have 3 different pieces. Actually, I'm missing one of them. Oh, let's see here. I'll have to go track those down. I'm missing my beaker tongs. Molly, can you look for another pair of tongs for me that look like this, but they're kind of round? I think I set them back over there somewhere. They're over back there maybe. Okay, so what you have right here, these are considered flask tongs, because if you look at the shape here, the flask, they can grab onto the top of a flask like this. So if you're heating a Erlenmeyer flask, you can easily grab that off of the hot plate, okay? The next pair of things that we have to handle hot things are test tube tongs. And again, you can see that they're designed, very good, thank you. They are designed to hold test tubes, so you can pull test tubes out of boiling water. Okay, and then the final handling item are these guys. Sorry, these are beaker tongs. So you can see the difference in shape between the flask tongs and the beaker tongs, right? The beaker tongs are meant to wrap around a beaker. And then you squeeze really hard so that you can hold onto that beaker and move it off of a hot container or hot surface, okay? All right, so those are our 3 types of tongs. So let's write those down. We have flask tongs, beaker tongs, and test tube. And those are all tongs. Okay, so that you don't have to grab onto hot glassware. Now, how do we make things hot? Well, one way that we can make something hot is with a Bunsen burner, and we'll use these a lot. This comes with a rubber hose that hooks into the gas faucet or gas hookups that are on the different lab tables, so you can just plug this in. I'll teach you how to use these, how to open them and get gas and start a fire and stuff with all of them. So this is a Bunsen burner. Okay, the other way that we can heat things is using a hot plate. So when you need something very, very, very hot, that's when you would use a Bunsen burner. Really, really, really hot. When you need to heat something and kind of keep it at a consistent temperature, that's when you would use a hot plate. So let me show you here. Kind of looks like a balance, but it's not. Here is the hot plate, okay? And you can tell it's a hot plate because it has a dial on here that you change the heat. This will always be lit up. I think this one's lit up when it's hot, so even if it's off and it's still a hot surface, that'll be on. But you can just set your item directly onto the hot plate, okay? So you have a hot plate. All right, and then let's write down hot plate. Lastly, under heating and handling hot stuff, hot plate. We have a couple of items that we use in conjunction with a Bunsen burner, okay? So that first item is a ring stand. Ugh, this is heavy. Okay, I gotta have this kind of back here. Hopefully you can see that okay. So the ring stand, if I tilt that, you can really see it, it's called a ring stand because you hook rings onto it. And then it also has some test tube clamps up here. So you can unclamp those and hold onto a test tube. But the general idea is that what you do with a ring stand is you take a piece of mesh. Here, I'm going to turn this down a little bit so that you can see. You take a piece of wire mesh and you set that on the ring. Then you take your beaker and you set your beaker on top of the wire mesh. Then you take your test tube and you put it into this clamp, this test tube clamp. Like so, and then you can lower this down into here, and then you take your Bunsen burner and you put that underneath, and you can heat things indirectly. So you could have water in the beaker and it's boiling, and then that boiling water is heating what's ever inside of the test tube, which is a pretty common thing for us to use. The other thing that you can do with this whole setup, with this whole ring stand setup, is you can use a what's called an evaporating dish. Okay, we can heat an evaporating dish a couple of different ways. One way is you can set it directly on the ring stand. They are made of very, 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 very strong porcelain, and so they can withstand a lot of heat. So you can put them on the ring stand, and then you put some solution in there, and you heat it until all the water boils off, and all that's left is the chemical that was originally in there. So you can put them there, or you can also set them on top of the hot plate that we showed before. Okay, so let's go back and add those items to our list here. We had the ring stand. And again, if you don't think you would be able to identify a ring stand from a picture, make sure that you make a little sketch. Then we had the wire mesh. And then we had the, let's see here, evaporating dish. Okay. So those are all the items that I want you to be familiar with. Here, let me double check and make sure we got them all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 goggles, or 20. What did I leave off of here? Let's see here. I can't think of it right now. That's okay. It'll come to me later. But now you have a better idea of the equipment that you're going to use in the lab. And again, you need to be familiar with their correct names and what they're used for, so that when we go to do a lab, you're using the proper equipment. Okay? So that's all you need to do for today. You're welcome now to go ahead and walk through the activity that goes along with this video, which is a naming and function identifying activity. Okay? Please let me know if you have any questions.